let's talk about some of the Photoshop stuff that I used this week to make this gruesome image. Weird buckeye tooth and a hagfish coming out. First off, let's look at our reference footage. Now again, whenever I do a project like this, I try and make sure that I'm acting in a non-destructive fashion. So I keep a copy of whatever I start off with down here as default layers so that when I duplicate them, just by dragging it down, I'm working on a duplicate, and therefore if I make mistakes, I can always go back to the original. Now the first thing I did was I enlarged this to be real big, and I got the generalized slug mouth all set up. So something like that. And the first thing that you notice here is perhaps the color balance shift and a couple other transformation things that I did. Note that this is positioned with the white sort of a lit side and a dark side. So when I'm positioning this, I at least try to line up that so that my overall lighting statement is sensible. So I rotated this specifically thinking that this guy's face is lit on this side. So, I can't get it perfect, but I can at least get the giant statement of which way your key light is coming from correct. The other thing I did was I used color balance to make sure that these start to match up. Now you might be looking at this and think, I'll just use Control U for hue saturation and adjust it like this. But the problem with this is if you get it so that the sort of warm shadows and overall warm tone match, by that point you've given everything sort of this green hue. So I generally find color balance to be a little more accurate in terms of matching photo references together. The hotkey is Control B, and again, if I wanted to match that, it's much easier to adjust the red channel, the magenta channel, and the yellow channel, and get something that more closely approximates the other references in this scene. So how did I get this with a mask around it? Well, this is where the pen tool comes in. You might be thinking about this as a time to use the magic wand or the lasso. And the lasso is not a bad idea, but you've probably experienced the problem of sometimes it's nice to use the hard lasso and sometimes it's nice to use the soft lasso or the hand-drawn lasso. You might have also experienced the problem of making a mistake with the lasso tool. See, like right there, it would be nice to do something that's nice and curved. But let's say I'm doing these and I accidentally double click. Well, now I have this sort of useless selection that accidentally got messed up right in the middle. This is where the pen tool is nice. The pen tool is going to create something called a work path. And the work path is over here if you ever want to work on it or duplicate it. But it's kind of equivalent to the quick mask. It's just a relative right now path. And it's not planned for something you save. Once you start a new path afterwards or convert it, it just goes away and you can make a new one. But working with the path tool is really nice because you can do things like get soft curves that you otherwise might not be able to. There's a couple of aspects to it that are good to know. For instance, a click just adds a hard-edged line, whereas a click and drag will give you a Bezier handle. Now, this can cause problems if you click on the next point, and you'll notice that Bezier did not go in a straight line. But you can use Alt to change the Bezier handle type to a soft transition. So for instance, I know already that this isn't going to go around there, so might as well just make it a nice hard transition. You can also hold Control while in this tool and adjust these points individually. And then get back on this one. So depending on how lazy you are, you can get a lot of this much, much faster than you otherwise might be capable of. Now whenever you have this at a place you like, you can right click and select Make Selection. And this will automatically make your selection. It's a little bit better and a little bit more sophisticated than the lasso tool, and that's why I really like it. It's a little less, you know, get 90% of the way there and you panic and then it's all ruined. So I highly recommend it. Now I did accidentally do one destructive thing in this workflow, which is you'll notice that I accidentally deleted these pixels. I also do have a mask on this, so I applied this as a mask, and then at some point I apparently deleted it. So that's one of those things where what if I went back and I realized I wanted some of this fish tank or I wanted this back tail. I can still go back and find my original reference. So I've got my tongue, and the color is kind of matched and the lighting is matched pretty good. But there is an issue of a couple of things. First off, there's some edge spill issues, which is the fact that you'll notice there's some pixel data here that's just not quite right. Well, the nice thing about having a selection mask is I can work on the pixels and still keep the outline that I want. So I could actually select this highlight color and just using the brush tool, I'm going to use a nice soft brush. I can paint that in. I'm worrying about the selection on one hand and the color of the edges on a separate basis, which means that it's very easy to fix. So just know that whenever you make selections, you're going to run into issues of edge spill. And a lot of times if you are using masks as your setup, it's very easy to go and fix them. This isn't really going to matter in these areas because it's going to be behind the teeth eventually. But it's good to know about. It's good to be sensitive to. Now, the next thing I need is a shadow, because right now this isn't really casting a shadow this way, and everything else is casting shadows. You might be tempted to go in and use the drop shadow as a layer effect or a layer style, but I'm generally against these because, I mean, first off, they suck, but they have their uses, especially for like text. But you do run into problems where this isn't how a shadow would actually fall in the real world. A drop shadow is kind of only useful for things that are like up in the sky and landing on the ground. Now, in reality, it's not going to be a uniform black color. And also, where this tongue is touching his lips, it's going to cast a shadow very close because it doesn't have to travel a long way. And you're going to have more contact shadow where the light has less area to bounce around. So it's going to be a little more nice and crisp. So what I prefer to do is paint it in like this. You can just use a big soft brush. Brackets will increase or decrease the size of your brush, and shift brackets will change the hardness of your brush. So just to show that, that's a hard brush. Shift right bracket until it's nice and hard, and shift left bracket will make it soft. I'm also going to set my flow to 10%, and don't be a dork and go up here and use a slider. Be a pro and use the hotkey. Various numbers on your number pad will change the opacity, and if you press it in rapid succession, it'll change both the tens digit and the ones digit. So 77 equals 77%. If I type it too slow, it's just going to go back to the 10 digit. You can also type 00 to get to 100% or 01 to get to 1%. The same is true for your flow if you hold shift. So shift 10 is 10%, and that's probably all I need to do. I'm going to select just a color from over here that I know is correct for shadows. And I can start painting that in. So again, it's going to be a tighter shadow wherever it's touching things and doesn't have to travel. And it's going to be a lighter shadow the further away it gets, where we might start having some light go into the shadow. Something like that. Now the next thing I do is I use a layer mode transfer, which is up here on your layers. I think it's Control Shift, Alt Shift. If you're on the layer move tool, Alt Shift plus and minus goes through all of the layer modes, and also Alt Shift and various hotkeys goes to defaults. So for instance, Alt Shift M is multiply, or you can just click it and go here. These are your darkeners, these are your lighteners, and these are the both ways. Now basically a layer mode transfer just changes how the top layer is going to interact with the layer below it. So when I set this to multiply, it ends up darkening things. So you can imagine this as a pixel that goes from 0, which is black, and 1, which is white. So if you multiply something by white, or by 1, it has no effect. It stays 5 times 1 is 5. If you multiply something by 0.5, or a gray pixel, that goes halfway down. So it would get closer to a 0 black pixel. And if you multiply something by 0, it's 0. In other words, a black pixel. So the darker you get in your colors here, the more effect this multiplier layer is going to have. So over here, just to show this, painting with black. Oops. I changed it on my brush. So painting with black darkens. Painting with white does nothing on this layer. So a hand-painted shadow is just a little bit more accurate and painterly. I think I then used the pen tool to make this selection, and then I turned it into a layer mask using this button down here, which means I can work on this separate from this. And I could do the same edge spill technique over here. I could select sort of toothy color, and while ignoring this alpha, I can paint that in so that it's not going to bug you as much. But the other thing I can do is actually add another drop shadow. And then that edge spill actually is matching up with its drop shadow color. And then I even do this same process once more with these little dudes to get the hands in front. And I again cleaned up the edge spill a little bit. I can do a little more over here. But so while not affecting the alpha, I can make that nice and hot and white again. Now the last thing I did was I used some healing brush to clean up some of the ugliness over here. And let's look at how you might go around that. So just to start off with this guy one more time. If I use Control T to make it big and I zoom up, I've got to get rid of this giant thumb. And a lot of times people jump far too quickly into things like the clone brush and they start trying to duplicate it. And they forget that they actually have like a giant patch right here that's all set to go. So what I like doing is, if I know those pixels are correct, I'm going to try and leave them as unmuddied by Photoshop as possible for as long as possible. So I can copy this, paste it, and just move this layer up. And sort of match that photo transition. Heck, I'll do it again. Just to get a nice patch of the halftone lit up side of his face. Put it there. This is the old school way of doing it. Now the nice thing about this is now cleanup is really easy because all I have to worry about is these seams where it's not correct. So this is where I'll switch to the healing brush and sort of just clean that up. And there you have it. So there's some Photoshop tips. I hope you have some happy shopping.